You sit in a room full of men talking fast, and you are the only one still holding your pen. That small delay changes the temperature. They glance at you, then back at each other, and suddenly your silence feels heavier than their noise. Most men call that weakness because they cannot tolerate the pause long enough to see what it does to the room. Speed gives them relief. Waiting gives them exposure. That is the lie. Rush does not make you strong. It just lets you escape the discomfort of not knowing yet. And the more expensive the choice, the more people want to flee that discomfort before the price is clear. They sign early, speak early, spend early, and call it decisiveness because the alternative would force them to sit inside uncertainty for one more minute. There's a reason this matters before Carnegie ever becomes a name attached to steel. The habit comes first. The outcome comes later. If you cannot wait when the room is pressuring you, you will pay for that pressure somewhere else. Walter Mischel's work on delayed gratification showed a simple pattern. The ability to hold off now changes what becomes possible later. Not because waiting is magical, because waiting protects you from the panic that makes bad choices feel necessary. And you know the feeling. Your hand is on the pen. The room is moving. The urge is to move with it so nobody notices you hesitate. What if the real advantage is hidden in the moment everyone else is trying to erase? 5 movements will make that answer harder to ignore. The deal lands in front of you like a blade on polished wood. Papers at the center. 3 faces turn toward you. A smile that is too tight. And the room is waiting for your hand to move before your mind has finished speaking. That is the slow room test. Not whether you understand the numbers. Not whether you can sound decisive. Whether you can sit inside the pressure long enough to notice what the pressure is trying to make you do. Most men call that feeling urgency. It is usually just discomfort wearing a suit. Speed feels strong because it ends the tension first. Patience feels weaker because it leaves you alone with it a little longer. Watch what happens in that room. The loudest voice lowers the cost of hesitation by making it look dangerous. The first signature becomes social proof. The longer you wait, the more exposed you feel, because silence gives everyone time to look at you and wonder if you are difficult, unsure, or behind. That is the real threat, not the deal. The social pain of being the one person who does not rush to relieve the room. Mischel's delayed gratification research points to the same mechanism in smaller form. The child who can wait for the second marshmallow is not just resisting sugar. He is learning that a feeling can be held without immediately obeying it. That matters because the mind under pressure does not only want the object. It wants the relief attached to the object. The signature, the purchase, the agreement. Each one can become a tiny escape hatch. You know the move. The pen hovers. The offer is not fully settled. Everyone else starts talking over the gap. You feel the drag in your chest, and you reach for action just to end the internal noise. That is why impatience is expensive before it is visible. It buys silence from your own nerves. Carnegie's advantage began there, in that kind of stillness. Not in a heroic flash. Not in a lucky market moment. He could remain seated inside uncertainty longer than the room could tolerate. That is a colder talent than ambition, and a rarer one. The man who can wait is not slow. He is harder to manipulate. And the room always reveals who can bear the pause, and who pays to escape it. Payday does strange things to you. You walk into the store with one plan, one ordinary item, one price you already accepted in your head. Then you see the better version sitting under cleaner light, with the polished label, the thicker fabric, the heavier box. It is not a need. It is a correction. A tiny private ceremony where you stop feeling behind for 5 minutes. So you spend more than you meant to, and the extra money is not really buying quality. It is buying relief. That is the price of being early. You pay the premium because you cannot tolerate the gap between what you have and what you think you should have. the object matters less than the emotional wound it covers. They say, "It's only a little more." The weak response is to call that prudence and hand over the card. The powerful response is to notice what is actually being purchased, not the item, but the feeling of catching up. That feeling has a cost, and Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky spent years showing how badly the mind behaves under pressure. Loss aversion means the sting of being behind lands harder than the pleasure of saving. So when you are tired, embarrassed, or impatient, you do not calculate cleanly. You choose the move that makes the discomfort stop. The purchase looks rational from the outside. Inside, it is emotional leakage. And once you see that, you start noticing the same pattern everywhere. The rushed commitment because silence felt awkward. The fast upgrade because the old one made you feel small. The dinner you did not need. The watch you did not want yesterday. The apartment you stretched for because you wanted the new life before you had earned the room for it. Each one arrives wearing a different mask. Each one charges the same fee. What makes this dangerous is that the bill never arrives at the moment of purchase. It arrives later, quiet and exact. You feel it when your margin disappears. You feel it when your month becomes brittle. You feel it when the thing you bought to reduce tension becomes the reason you cannot breathe. Carnegie understood the opposite of that impulse. He did not need to prove himself by moving first, and that saved him from paying the anxious surcharge that ruins so many people before they ever build anything worth keeping. The costly move is rarely the wrong object. It is the wrong timing. And the man who can sit through that urge sees a different price. If this cuts close, stay with the channel. Subscribe and like, and you stay near the kind of thinking that reads silence as leverage, not emptiness, while we move into Carnegie's capital of silence. Carnegie did not begin as a titan. He began as a boy carrying messages through Pittsburgh, then as a telegraph messenger and railroad clerk, watching other men make money because they knew a little sooner, or moved a little later, than everyone else. In his own autobiography, he keeps returning to those early years because that was where the lesson lived. Information did not arrive cleanly, and power belonged to the person who could wait inside the gap. That gap matters. A telegraph office is not a place of noise. It is a place of fragments. A wire clicks, a slip is handed over, a name is called, and suddenly one man is rushing while another is still guessing. A railroad clerk sees the same thing in a different costume. Trains are late. Cargo changes hands. Orders arrive before the men who sent them expect an answer. If you panic in that world, you start moving before you understand what moved. Carnegie learned to do the opposite. Not because he was passive, because he noticed that urgency makes you easy to read. The man who looks hurried signals that he needs the result now. And once that need is visible, other people can press on it. They can hold back. They can raise the price. They can make you pay for your own tension. Silence does not mean weakness in that setting. Silence means you are not bleeding. That is the capital of silence. You do not announce your need, so you keep your leverage intact. You let the message finish arriving before you decide what it means. You let the room reveal itself before you reveal yourself. Carnegie's advantage was not that he knew everything. It was that he refused to act like a man who could not bear not knowing yet. And that changed what the delay was worth. In the telegraph office, a few minutes could separate rumor from fact. On the railroad side, a patient clerk could see which orders were real and which were only pressure wearing a collar. If you have ever watched the wrong person rush into a decision just to stop the feeling in his chest, you already understand the pattern. He is not buying a better outcome. He is buying relief. Relief is expensive. Carnegie treated waiting like a position, not a pause. That is the part most people miss. He was not sitting still because he had nothing to do. He was sitting still because the person who can stand inside uncertainty without fidgeting sees more than the person trying to escape it. In that world, The loudest man in the room was usually the most exposed. Silence is not empty when the other side is forced to speak first. You know how rare that is. You feel the pull to fill the gap. Stay with that feeling. The real advantage does not always look like action. Sometimes it looks like a rail line being laid one section at a time, a mill adding another furnace, a bridge carrying more freight than last season, and the same owner refusing to pull cash out the moment a project turns green. That is where money starts to behave differently. Wages stop being the ceiling. Ownership starts to breathe. You know the temptation in a build-out like that. The first profit arrives, and your hand wants to close around it. New coat, new carriage, new office, new proof that you are no longer behind. But every dollar pulled out early is a dollar that never becomes a second machine, a second shipment, a second turn of the screw. The waiting is not dead time. It is the condition that lets the machine enlarge itself. What looks like restraint from the outside is really control over the pace at which gains are allowed to become larger than effort. That is the mechanism Carnegie understood. Not romance. Not luck. Repeated retention. A business that keeps part of what it makes can push that retained gain back into iron, rail, fuel, and capacity. Then the next round arrives on a larger base. Then the next. The small edge does not stay small because it is given room to repeat. If you keep resetting to zero with every impulse, you never let the previous win do any work for you. You stay trapped in the emotional present. The owner who waits is living in a wider time scale. Benoit Mandelbrot spent years showing that in the real world, outcomes do not arrive in neat little averages. They arrive in long tails, with repeated small changes eventually dominating the picture. That matters here because industrial wealth is rarely a single explosion. It is a chain of accretions. One retained gain, then another, each one slightly changing the size of the next decision. The person who only respects dramatic moments misses the deeper math. The person who can hold position understands that the curve is built from boring repetition. Look at the concrete difference. A laborer gets paid for the week, and the week ends there. The owner keeps a share of the week and sends it back into the plant, which changes next week before it starts. One life is linear. The other is recursive. That is why waiting is leverage. Not because time is magical, but because time is allowed to compound through ownership. And compounding is ruthless about who gets to stay in the game long enough to matter. Most men think patience means doing less. It does not. It means refusing to sabotage your own base. It means letting yesterday's gain become today's capacity instead of today's impulse. That is a colder discipline than speed, because speed can be fake for a day. Patience has to be sustained long enough for the numbers to become undeniable. The line is simple. If you keep grabbing the fruit, the tree never grows. And when the numbers finally start speaking for themselves, the last temptation is to interrupt them. Carnegie did not need to announce himself. That is the part men miss when they look at wealth and only see size. The expensive part was never just the steel, or the rail lines, or the control. It was the refusal to perform urgency for the room. He let ownership do the speaking. He let time do the persuading. He let discipline carry the weight that insecure men usually try to carry with noise. Watch what that means in a real room. A man with less self-control walks in and starts telegraphing his need before anyone has asked. He talks too much. He presses too early. He wants the other side to know he is serious, because he is afraid seriousness will not be visible otherwise. Carnegie's advantage was colder. He could hold still long enough for the situation to reveal itself. He did not rush to prove he was winning. He waited until the structure of the deal made the proof obvious. That is a different kind of power. Which kind do you trust more when the stakes are real? Thorstein Veblen named the trap behind the opposite behavior, conspicuous consumption. The obvious display is not just taste. It is a signal of dependence. You spend to be seen, and the spending confesses that being seen matters too much. Carnegie moved against that reflex. He understood that the man who needs witnesses is still asking permission from the crowd. The man who can wait does not need applause to keep going. That is why the delay becomes final, not because nothing is happening, but because everything important is happening out of sight. The impatient man wants a visible win now, so he reaches for the nearest proof. The strategic man accepts the slower proof, because he knows the slower proof changes the terms of the next decision. One buys relief, the other builds distance, and distance is what gives you room to choose instead of react. You can feel the difference in the body before you can name it. Relief tightens around the moment. Distance opens it. Relief says, end this now. Distance says, let it mature. One of those impulses keeps you busy. The other keeps you free. That is the final delay. Not waiting because you have nothing to do, but waiting because you are not dependent on immediate recognition. When you are no longer desperate to be seen winning, you stop trading future strength for present comfort. The room still moves. The pressure is still there. You just stop kneeling to it. Are you buying relief, or are you building distance? That is the part most men never learn to tolerate. They want the room to witness movement, because movement feels like rank. But the real divider is colder than that. It is not rich versus poor. It is impatient versus strategic. You can build a life that looks busy and still be trapped inside urgency. Or you can look quiet and be accumulating position while everyone else is spending theirs. Carnegie understood that delay was not a pause in the game. It was the game. That has a cost. Waiting asks you to carry uncertainty without reaching for relief. It asks you to let other people misread you. It asks you to lose the cheap satisfaction of being first to speak, first to sign, first to prove yourself. Most men avoid that cost because it feels like invisibility. It is not. It is control. And that is why the hand still on the pen matters. Not because silence is noble, because silence gives the outcome time to expose itself. The man who can sit through that pressure without flinching is not weaker. He is harder to buy, harder to rush, harder to corner. That is the deeper subject underneath Carnegie. Not wealth alone, but identity under pressure. What kind of man can wait long enough to make the room pay more? If you know which one you are becoming, stay with this channel. If you want more cold analysis like this, subscribe. And tell me plainly, when the room rushes, do you move with it? Or do you wait long enough to change the price?